Hi, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another video. As you know, I run this channel with my son Ollie. We cover lots of different topics: food and travel, technology, factory visits and opinion pieces. And today I'm doing an opinion piece. And that's because recently, in the last few weeks, there's been a number of outbreaks of coronavirus here in China. The most severe one so far being one in Xi'an, and residents have been in a situation of lockdown there for some time, over 2 weeks now. And the media in the West are sort of, starting to have a go at China about this, draconian lockdown. And well, I have experienced this myself, because on the 6th or 7th of January there was 2 cases of coronavirus found here in Shenzhen, and I saw over the next days how this massive local government machine came into operation to pretty much test everybody and keep the virus under control. So what happened is, in the very early hours of the 7th of January, a couple were confirmed as having the coronavirus, and throughout the rest of that day, pretty much straight away, the complex they were living in got locked down until everybody was tested. But a whole machine rolled out, and within about the next 48 hours after that, they pretty much tested the whole of the Shenzhen population. And that involves sort of mobilizing a huge amount of not just hospital nurses and nurses from clinics, but a huge amount of volunteers throughout the city. And on that evening, I went to my local testing station. Now, the testing station, there was hundreds and hundreds of these temporary testing stations erected and around Shenzhen. So I went to my local one, and sort of on the first evening we had to queue for about 40 minutes because it was extremely busy. 40 minutes is not a huge amount of time, but we went through there, we queued up with everybody else, we got our test done, and it was really good. And then every day since then, we've been tested, and normally the following morning you have your results on your phone, which shows that you were tested at what time, and that test normally lasts for a period of, doesn't last for a period of 40, it gives you validity for 48 hours. Because now many government buildings in Shenzhen, and to be able to travel out of Shenzhen, you need to show that you've had a coronavirus test, and that is negative within the last 48 hours. But although these things are a pain in the butt sometimes, I do think that China's zero COVID approach at the moment is the right one. And the reason I think that is, if we look at what's happening in the USA, since early January, average daily cases have been over 500,000. That's an average of 500,000 cases of coronavirus per day. And since early December, the average deaths has been over 1,000 per day. That's 1,000 people dying per day of coronavirus. And if you look at the average for about the last week, that's actually increased to 1,500 per day. Now, as you know, the deaths generally lag the case numbers by a few weeks. So over the last few weeks, the case numbers have actually skyrocketed, and it's inevitable that the amount of deaths will also rise. Now, this seems very, very strange in that just a day or so ago there was news out of the US that the federal government, the state governments no longer have to report their case or death rate figures to the federal government, which suggests they're going to stop reporting countrywide case numbers and death numbers. Now, have they done this because they know that there's going to be a surge in the numbers of deaths over the next few weeks, and they want to try and sort of hide that as much as possible from the population? Because if I was a citizen of the US, I'd be looking at how well China have done and really questioning the way my government have handled this. I mean, to me, it seems like in the US they've completely, done away with any prevention measures whatsoever, and it's just a case of, okay, let the virus, let it spread, and it doesn't really matter if there's 1,000 people a day dead or dying. Now, if you then sort of contrast this with China, there's actually 4.2 times the population here in China, 4.25 times the population here in China. So if you looked at, if you did a like for like, and the Chinese government let the coronavirus just sort of pretty much run wild throughout China, you would literally have 2.25 million cases per day and upwards of 6,000 deaths a day. That's with all other things being equal. If the transmission rate was the same, which I suggest that there'd be no difference, but could you just imagine how the media in the West would be responding if there were over 2 million cases a day in China and 6,000 deaths? They would be going absolutely crazy, Oh, look how bad China are. They're letting 6,000 people a day die, blah, blah, blah. And the next thing I'd like to come on to about the zero COVID approach here in China is how it's protected the economy. So if we look, for example, at 2020, which was the first year of the coronavirus, China was pretty much the only economy in the world. Most countries' economies contracted during that time. China's grew by 2.2%. And if you look at this current year, 2021, China's GDP grew by, a substantial amount. I think it was 8%. And, that's much more than any other country. And I believe that's a direct result of their zero COVID approach. Yes, they've had lockdowns, but they've been, since the start, the lockdowns have been very sort of regional. Where they see an outbreak, they will do a lockdown. They will then get the virus under control. That normally happens within a very short space of time, weeks, and sometimes within days. Once they're happy, they've done enough testing, that lockdown is released, those people go back to normal. So these are very, very specific lockdowns in regions. It's not that we're locking the whole of the country down here. And if you look at the projected growth over the next few years, China's economy looks to going to be performed very, very well. Also, the amount of exports China achieved in 2021 also hit another record. And in fact, their trade surplus with the rest of the world was $676 billion, and $396 billion of that was with the USA. And that just shows you that that the zero COVID approach that China has used has been a winning formula. Now I'd like to also move on to that. If China let the virus just sort of rip and spread like other countries have, then that would not only have a massive effect on China's economy, but it would also have big effects to the rest of the world. Now, when the pandemic started, there was a lot of talk about that, all these factories and manufacturing is going to move out of China to other places. And yes, some did move to Vietnam, and Bangladesh, and we saw what happened in Vietnam when the pandemic took off there. Many of those factories had to close and Western supply chains were massively disrupted. Now, although there was some disruption to foreign supply chains from China, it's actually been very, very minimal. But I can tell you, if the coronavirus was allowed to spread here like it has been in other countries, then the supply chain to many Western currencies would be severely affected, because many factories would be closed down, goods wouldn't be manufactured, which means goods wouldn't be shipped. It would actually be chaotic. And you also need to remember that not just only finished goods are manufactured here, and China supplies a huge amount of the masks, the PPE and the test kits that you use that are used in Western countries, but also it supplies a lot of raw materials for things that are finished in those countries. So a lot of medicines, raw materials for medicines, raw materials for cars, car parts, and all that kind of thing. Even if they were only shut down for a short amount of time, let's say a month or 2 months, it would take 6 months, if not years, to get all those supply chains back up and running. So it would have absolutely devastating effects on Western supply chains. So I think you need to think about that before you go criticising China's zero COVID approach. And as I say, just to conclude this, yes, they have a zero COVID approach here in China, and yes, sometimes it is a pain in the ass. We sometimes have to jump through hoops and comply to many conditions, but in the scheme of things, it's a small thing we have to do to keep safe. And I'd love to know what your comments and thoughts are, so please leave comments in the channel. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It does help us get out there. It helps the YouTube algorithm. If you like the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button. But as always, for now, take care.